The desert did not forgive easily. It held its heat like memory, unrelenting, vast, and merciless. To cross it was to enter a place where even time hesitated, and the living became as quiet as the stones. Lena Marrow had not meant to trespass this far. She had told herself she would only follow the trail until the map stopped making sense, until she found what the university archives whispered about in half-skeptical footnotes. The Mirror of Conde, a relic of the old Apache stories said to show a person their unguarded truth. But greed for discovery and the slow, gnawing need to prove herself had carried her farther than reason could follow. Now, as she trudged between burnt orange cliffs, her boots filled with sand and her breath scraped like paper, she wondered if she had crossed into a place where her name no longer mattered. The sun was a white brand on her back. The wind, dry and sharp, carried the scent of sage and something ancient, something that felt like breath drawn by the earth itself. Her water was nearly gone, her compass needle trembling, as if confused by the heat waves rippling off the stone. Somewhere behind her, the world she'd known, of clean laboratories and skeptical colleagues, had dissolved into memory. Ahead of her stretched only silence and the faint shimmer of the horizon, but beneath that silence there was a hum, a pulse she could almost feel through her boots. The desert wasn't empty. It was waiting. She came upon the ruins just before dusk. They were not grand, no towering pillars or obvious markers of civilization, just low walls half swallowed by the sand, the ghost of a structure that had once been circular, maybe ceremonial. A few stone carvings caught her eye, their patterns almost erased by centuries of wind. She brushed them gently, fingertips tracing the outlines of symbols she didn't recognize. The moment her skin met the stone, a faint vibration moved through her, as if something alive stirred beneath the rock. She jerked her hand back. "It's just the heat," she muttered aloud, her voice startling in its smallness. No echo returned to her. Her pack was heavy with notes and fragments from the dig she had abandoned days ago. Pieces of pottery, rubbings, and a small metal case wrapped in canvas. That case held the mirror. Even now, she couldn't bring herself to unwrap it. Every time she had looked at it since finding it buried beneath a mound of white stones, her reflection had seemed slightly wrong, as though the glass had caught her image before she'd posed for it. The Apache tribes that once moved through this land had called it sacred ground. Even the records she'd read, written by explorers who barely understood what they saw, had hinted at that. "Those who enter the Canyon of Spirits," one translation read, "will face what they hide." She had laughed when she first read it. But she wasn't laughing now. The desert darkened around her, the sky deepening into a bruised violet. The heat bled away quickly, replaced by a dry cold that bit through her clothes. Stars began to appear, one, then dozens, then hundreds, until the whole sky seemed to tilt forward, pressing down like an ancient canopy of light. She stumbled to a stop near a split in the canyon wall, where a thin trickle of water gleamed in the moonlight. Dropping her pack, she knelt and cupped her hands, drinking greedily. The water tasted of stone and iron, but it steadied her heartbeat. For the first time in days, she let her body relax. That was when she heard it, a whisper of movement behind her. She froze. The sound was subtle, almost swallowed by the night wind, but unmistakable. The faint crush of sand beneath a deliberate footstep. Her eyes darted to the shadows. The canyon walls loomed high on either side, cutting off most of the moonlight. Her heart hammered. "Who's there?" she called out. No answer. The silence pressed in again, denser now, heavier. Somewhere in the dark, something breathed. She reached for her pack, fumbling with the strap until her fingers found the cold metal of the case. The mirror inside seemed to hum faintly, as if responding to the air's tension. She didn't know whether to draw it out or bury it. The desert wind shifted, and with it came a scent she could not place: smoke, leather, and wild sage. She turned toward the smell. And that was when she saw him. A silhouette standing at the edge of the spring, motionless, outlined in moonlight. A tall figure, hair bound in dark braids, skin burnished like the stones around them. An Apache warrior. And suddenly, Lena understood that the desert silence had never been empty at all. It had been watching, waiting, and now it had answered. The figure did not move. For a moment, Lena thought the moonlight had tricked her, that what she saw was only a mirage sculpted from shadow and exhaustion. But then the silhouette's chest rose and fell, slow and steady. He was real. He stood at the far edge of the spring where the canyon wall met the sand. His presence was still but not tentative. He looked as though he belonged to the desert itself, not merely standing upon it, but drawn from its stone and wind. His eyes, reflecting the pale light, were fixed on her. Lena's throat went dry. Her first instinct was to speak, to explain, to justify, to bridge the impossible space between them. But her tongue felt heavy. The words that came to mind, "I'm lost, I mean no harm, I didn't know this was sacred land," all felt like lies, or at least half-truths. She had known. Somewhere deep down she had known. The man stepped forward, silent. His movements were smooth, deliberate. His hair, bound back with leather, caught the light and shimmered like a raven's wing. He wore no uniform, no marker of allegiance, only a deerskin vest, dark trousers, and the glint of something metallic at his belt. A knife, perhaps. He stopped a few paces away. The air between them seemed to pulse, thick with a kind of electricity that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with recognition. Lena lifted a hand slightly, palm outward. "I don't want trouble," she managed, her voice rough from thirst. "I just needed water." The man regarded her in silence. His expression was unreadable, not hostile, not curious, simply measured. His gaze flicked briefly to the pack beside her, to the faint corner of canvas that concealed the mirror's case. "You came here," he said at last, his voice low, resonant, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the canyon walls. Not knowing who watches, Lena swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to—" He raised a hand, not in threat but in quiet command. The gesture silenced her instantly. No one crosses this canyon by accident. His tone held neither anger nor accusation. It was a statement as immutable as the stone beneath their feet. "You carry something that doesn't belong to you." Her pulse quickened. "How do you—" Again that silence. Again that gaze. In the flickering moonlight she realized his eyes were the color of obsidian, black but alive with depth. They reflected her face faintly, distorted by the curve of his pupil. "I found it buried," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I didn't steal it. I thought it was lost." "Lost," he echoed, as if tasting the word. "Nothing sacred is ever lost. Only hidden." The desert wind sighed between them, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Lena wanted to look away, but couldn't. The truth of his words clung to her. For years she had dug up pieces of the past, called them discoveries, and pinned them into catalogs. But this was something else. The air around the mirror had felt alive from the beginning, and now she could feel it thrumming faintly in her pack, as if the object itself recognized its guardian. He took another step closer. She could see the scars on his arms now, thin silvery lines that caught the moonlight like threads of mercury. Symbols, perhaps, or marks of initiation. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "This place is for the dead." Something in his tone, not threat, but sorrow, made her chest tighten. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Now you do." For a long moment, neither moved. The night pressed close around them, the wind a slow breath between rock faces. Somewhere far off, an owl called once, then fell silent. Finally he spoke again. "The mirror you carry, and it does not forgive curiosity. It shows what even the spirits turn from." Lena's hand went instinctively to the case. She could feel the faint vibration through the fabric, a hum that matched the beating of her heart. "Why?" she asked, barely above a whisper. He tilted his head slightly as though listening to something beyond her words. "Because truth is heavier than gold, and you carry more of it than you can see." He turned away then, glancing toward the canyon's mouth where the path wound back into the desert. "You will not leave this place the same," he said, "if you live to leave it at all." Then, with the unhurried grace of one who had nothing to fear, he stepped into the shadows and vanished, leaving her alone with the mirror's pulse, the whisper of wind, and the weight of every choice that had led her there. And for the first time, Lena understood that she hadn't simply discovered an artifact. She had awakened it. The desert slept uneasily that night. The air hung thick with silence, the kind that wasn't stillness at all, but listening. Every shift of sand, every brush of wind felt aware, as though the canyon itself waited for Lena to move, to speak, to decide what came next. She sat by the spring, knees drawn up, the pack resting in her lap. The moon had climbed higher, turning the cliffs silver and the water to glass. Her reflection trembled in it, a stranger's face gaunt and dust-streaked, eyes hollowed by exhaustion, but it wasn't the reflection in the water that haunted her. It was the one waiting inside the mirror. She had felt it all evening, the pull, the faint hum that pressed against her ribs like a heartbeat not her own. When the Apache warrior vanished into the darkness, his words had lingered in her mind like a curse. You carry more truth than you can see. She wasn't sure whether he'd meant it as warning or prophecy. Now, with the desert holding its breath around her, she unwrapped the canvas from the metal case. Her fingers trembled, both from cold and from something deeper, anticipation maybe, or fear of herself. The mirror was smaller than she remembered. The frame was dark iron, etched with symbols that seemed to shift subtly when the moonlight struck them. The glass itself was so clear it barely looked real, its surface thin as frost. She stared at it for a long time before she dared to touch it. The moment her fingertips brushed the surface, the air changed. The wind stilled, the insects quieted. Even the distant cry of an owl cut short, leaving a hollow silence that pressed against her ears. And in that silence, a single word rose from her throat before she realized she had spoken it. No. She didn't know what she was refusing. The silence, the pull, the truth. She only knew that something deep within her resisted. The mirror shimmered faintly. Her reflection looked back, but not quite. The woman in the glass was cleaner, younger, unmarked by the desert. Her hair gleamed, her posture straightened. Yet her eyes were wrong, cold, watchful, the expression of someone pretending to be human. Lena leaned closer. Her breath fogged the surface for an instant, and in that instant the reflection smiled. She recoiled so sharply she nearly dropped the mirror. Her pulse hammered in her ears. "It's not real," she whispered. "It's not," but then another voice answered. Her own, but not from her lips. "Are you sure?" The words rippled across the air like sound carried underwater. Lena's hands shook. "Who are you?" The reflection tilted its head, mirroring her movement perfectly. "Who are you?" The moon slid from behind a cloud, spilling pale light over the canyon. The reflection changed with it, shadows deepening beneath its eyes, the faint curve of a scar appearing on its cheek that she didn't have. Her breath hitched. That scar, she remembered it. She'd had it once years ago from a climbing accident. It had faded with time, almost disappeared, but the mirror showed it as it had been, raw, angry, unforgettable. She reached up to touch her cheek. Smooth. Whole. But the mirror insisted otherwise. It was showing her not as she was, but as she had been, and perhaps as she still was. Beneath everything she'd buried, a sob escaped her before she could stop it. "No one has seen my body," she whispered, the words spilling out without thought, as though the mirror had drawn them from her marrow. The sound of her voice in the canyon startled her, fragile and small, yet so full of truth that it hurt. All her life, she'd hidden behind versions of herself, the academic, the explorer, the woman who smiled for photographs beside bones and ruins. But the truth was simpler, crueler. She had never really been seen. Not by her colleagues, not by her lovers, not even by herself. The mirror pulsed once, faintly. Then within the reflection, movement, a shadow behind her shoulder. Lena turned sharply, heart leaping. Nothing. Only the canyon, the rocks, the thin wind. But when she looked back at the mirror, the shadow remained. It was not behind her, it was in the reflection. A tall, dark figure stepping closer through the shimmer of glass, as though from another world. Her pulse froze. The Apache warrior. He was there. In the reflection, not in the desert behind her, but inside the mirror's surface, his eyes catching the same moonlight. His voice distant yet unmistakable as it rolled like thunder through the canyon of her mind. "Then let me be first." The words struck her like an echo from inside her own heartbeat. "Let me be first." Lena froze, the mirror trembling in her hands. The voice had not come from the canyon, not from the air, but from within the glass itself. As though the reflection had breathed and spoken, her pulse surged so violently that for a moment she thought she would faint. She tore her eyes away, forcing herself to glance behind her. half expecting to see the Apache warrior standing once again at the edge of the spring. But there was nothing. Only stone and moonlight, and yet she could feel him. A presence, quiet but immense, seemed to settle around her. The air pressed close, charged with something old, and not anger but authority. The kind that didn't need to raise its voice to be obeyed. Slowly, she turned back to the mirror. The reflection still showed the canyon, bathed in silver light. But now the warrior stood within it, not as a ghost or distortion, but as something solid, grounded. He met her gaze directly through the glass, his expression unreadable. Her mouth went dry. "You're not real," she whispered. "Then why do you tremble?" His voice was low, almost kind, but edged with something that made the small hairs at the back of her neck rise. She faltered. "You're in my head. You're part of it, now whatever this mirror is doing." He didn't deny it. Perhaps. But what the mirror reveals, it does not invent. She wanted to look away, to shut the case and bury it in the sand, to unsee everything that shimmered within that glass. But she couldn't. His eyes held her there, dark, deep, and steady, like the desert night itself, refusing to release her. "You said no one has seen your body," he said. She flinched. "I didn't mean you did," he interrupted softly. "But you don't understand what you confessed." Lena gripped the edges of the mirror until her knuckles whitened. "It was a mistake. I don't even know what I meant. You meant truth." He stepped closer, not in the canyon, but inside the reflection. Each movement rippled the glass as though it were water, spreading waves of silver light across her lap. Lena's breath caught. "What do you want from me?" His eyes softened, though his voice did not. "To see you," she blinked. "You already can." "No," he said. "You show your face, your hands, your cleverness, but not you. Not the woman beneath the dust and lies. The mirror can see that. I asked to see it too." The words struck a chord so deep it felt physical, like being touched somewhere no one else had ever reached. Shame and anger rose together in her chest. "You have no right," she said sharply. "You don't even know me." He tilted his head slightly. "Don't I?" And with that, the reflection shifted again. Now instead of the canyon, she saw herself standing in a room she hadn't been in for years. The dig site tent. A table strewn with papers and the same metal case before her, its lid open. She saw her own hands lifting the mirror, saw the brief flicker of wonder in her eyes, and then something else. Greed. The reflection held nothing back. It showed her taking photographs, cataloging her discovery. And then when the wind howled and the earth seemed to groan, she saw herself hesitate. Then steal it anyway, whispering, "I'll return it when I understand it." Lena's throat closed. "Stop," she breathed, but the image didn't stop. It shifted again, now showing the faces of the colleagues she'd lied to, the grants she'd falsified, the quiet betrayal of a friend whose credit she'd taken. Each image stabbed through her like a blade of light. "Enough," she cried, slamming the mirror face down on the ground. The impact rang out like a struck bell. The desert seemed to exhale. She fell forward, hands braced in the sand, chest heaving. Tears slipped down her face, drying almost instantly in the cold air. From the silence, his voice came again, softer now, but no less firm. "You asked what I wanted," he said. "It is this, your truth. The body is not what the eyes see. It is the weight of what you've done carried without witness. That is what no one has seen. That is what the desert demands." Lena lifted her head, meeting his gaze once more through the faint shimmer still alive in the mirror's cracked reflection. "What happens?" she asked, voice raw. "If I let you see it." He was quiet for a moment. Then perhaps you begin to live." The wind rose again, thin and mournful, curling through the canyon like a ghost that had forgotten its name. Lena stayed kneeling beside the fallen mirror, her breath shallow, her heart aching with a kind of exhaustion that no sleep could cure. The Apache warrior's words still lingered in her ears. "Then perhaps you begin to live." For a long time, she didn't move. The mirror lay half buried in sand, reflecting a broken fragment of moonlight. She could almost pretend it was lifeless now, just a piece of metal and glass almost. But the hum beneath her palm said otherwise. The air had changed again, not sharply this time, but subtly, as if the night had begun to breathe in rhythm with her. The sand trembled faintly beneath her knees, the stones shifting like they recognized her presence. When she reached toward the mirror again, it was warm. She hesitated. Every instinct screamed to throw it away, to let the desert swallow it whole. But some deeper pull, something beyond curiosity, beyond reason, kept her hand steady. The surface of the glass shimmered, rippling like disturbed water. For an instant it reflected only the moon. Then as Lena leaned closer, the image changed. She saw herself again, but not the woman of now or then. This was something different. Her body seemed made of light and dust, flickering like a flame caught in wind. Behind her image stretched an endless horizon of shifting sand, and within it other shapes began to form, faint silhouettes of people, blurred as if by heat. She whispered without meaning to. "Who are they?" "They are what you've left behind," came the warrior's voice. Lena turned sharply, but he was not there. His voice, she realized, was inside the mirror again. "They follow you," he continued. "Every word unsaid, every truth unburied. They are the weight that clings to you when you try to run." Lena's pulse thudded in her ears. "I never meant to harm anyone. I was just seeking," he finished for her. Always seeking, but never looking inward. The reflection flickered and now the scene inside the mirror shifted once more. She saw him, the Apache warrior, standing on the same ground she did, yet from another time. His skin was streaked with ash, his hair unbound, his chest marked with paint. He stood beside a small mound of stones, a burial. In his hands he held the mirror. He knelt and placed it upon the mound, murmuring words she couldn't understand. But she could feel their meaning, a promise, a vow. "This is your memory," she said softly. "It is the mirror's," he answered. "It shows not only the thief but the keeper." The image expanded, swallowing the canyon around her. She saw the warrior again, this time in battle, defending the same sacred ground where she now knelt. The clash of voices and fire filled the night. He fought fiercely, but when he fell, his hand never left the mirror. Even in death he guarded it. Lena's chest tightened. "You died here." His voice came like a sigh. "I remained." The mirror pulsed brighter, the light washing over her hands, her face, her chest. It burned, but not painfully. More like it was pulling something from her. Something heavy. Her memories surged in flashes. The tent, the dig site, the jealous arguments, the ambition that had driven her to take what wasn't hers. Then other memories, and ones she hadn't thought of in years, surfaced. Her father's disappointment, her mother's silence, the long ache of being unseen. She felt stripped bare. The desert itself seemed to draw nearer, the cliffs trembling with the vibration of whatever the mirror was awakening. "You said it shows what even the spirits turn from," she whispered. "Is this it, shame?" "No," he said. "It shows what you've forgotten you are." The light flared again, and suddenly she saw herself and the warrior standing side by side, their reflections overlapping, their faces almost merging. His eyes glowed like embers. Hers mirrored them. "You and I," he said, "are bound by the same hunger and to be known, to be forgiven." The words sank deep. Lena's hands trembled around the mirror. "What do I do?" she asked. He looked at her through the glass, and though he did not smile, something softened in his face. "You finish what you began, return what you took, and see it, all of it, without turning away." The light faded slowly. The wind began to move again, whispering through the canyon's hollow throat. When the mirror stilled, it reflected only the desert, and Lena's face within it, pale, raw, and streaked with tears. But for the first time, she did not look like a stranger. The dawn came quietly, as if unsure it was welcome. A faint band of light touched the canyon rim, washing the cliffs in gold and rose. Lena had not slept. She sat with the mirror balanced on her knees, its surface dull now, lifeless, or simply resting. The desert had changed with the light. What had seemed alien and haunted beneath the moon now looked sacred in another way, as if every rock had been placed with intention. The silence was no longer heavy. It was reverent, and yet the warrior was still there. He did not step from the shadows this time. He simply appeared beside her, not as a ghost, but as something more tangible than mist. The edges of him shimmered faintly in the sun, his form outlined with gold. "You've been watching me," Lena said softly. "I've been waiting," he answered. She turned to him. "For what?" "For you to see." She hesitated, then nodded at the mirror. "It showed me pieces of your life last night. But I don't understand. Who were you before this?" For a long moment he didn't reply. The wind rose, tugging at his hair, carrying the smell of sage and dry earth. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it, the tone of someone remembering something that still burned. "I was called Taza, son of Conde," he said. "The mirror you hold was hers." Lena blinked. "Your mother's?" He inclined his head. "She was a seer among our people, not for fortune, not for vanity, but for truth. The mirror was her way of speaking with the spirits of memory. It did not tell the future. It reminded the living what they owed to the past." He turned his gaze toward the rising sun. "When the soldiers came, when they cut through our valley and burned what they could not understand, my mother hid the mirror in stone. She told me that truth must sometimes sleep, or it will destroy those who touch it too soon." His eyes darkened. She was right. Lena listened, heart thrumming with something that wasn't quite fear anymore, more like awe. "You died protecting it," he nodded once. It was all that remained of her voice. "I swore no hand unworthy would take it again." His gaze flicked toward her and steady, unflinching. "Then you came?" Lena's stomach tightened. "I didn't mean to steal it. I know." His tone softened, and for the first time there was no judgment in it. "You came because you heard its call. That is how truth works. It finds those who need it most." She looked down at the mirror, tracing a thumb across its cool frame. "It showed me my mistakes. The things I buried." "It can show you more," Taza said. "Not punishment, memory. The story that binds all of us. You, me, my mother, the earth itself." He crouched beside her, his hand hovering above the mirror's surface but not touching it. "Would you see what I see?" Lena hesitated. She wasn't sure she could bear more, but something in his voice and a quiet grief that had lasted centuries compelled her to nod. The glass shimmered once, twice, and then the desert was gone. She stood beside Taza in another time, the sky heavy with smoke, the air filled with the distant thunder of gunfire. Warriors rode through the dust, their cries mixing with the roar of rifles. The ground was streaked with fire and blood. At the center of it all stood a woman, tall, fierce, her face lined with both wisdom and sorrow. Her hair was braided with beads that caught the sun. She held the mirror aloft, its surface blazing like captured lightning. Lena knew without being told that this was Conde. As the soldiers drew nearer, she spoke words in a language Lena could not understand, yet somehow felt. A vow, a farewell. Then she pressed the mirror to her son's chest, to Taza's chest, and whispered his name. The light consumed everything. When it faded, Lena was back in the canyon. The mirror lay silent in her lap, the sun fully risen now. She turned to him. "She gave her power to you. She gave me her burden," he said quietly. "To guard it until someone came who could release it." Lena's throat tightened. "You think that's me?" His eyes met hers, ancient, weary, but clear. "The mirror chose you. It always chooses the one who hides most from herself." Lena looked away, her pulse trembling. "And if I fail it?" He smiled faintly, the first real smile she had seen from him. "Then the desert will remember. But so will I." The wind moved again, gentle this time, stirring the sand around them like a benediction. And in the hush that followed, Lena realized she was no longer afraid of the mirror, or the warrior, or even the truth. She was afraid only of closing her eyes before she had seen everything it meant to show her. The sun had climbed higher now, spilling molten light into every crevice of the canyon. The night's silver mysteries were replaced by the gold of morning, clearer, harsher, but no less sacred. Lena rose slowly, her muscles stiff from the cold, her mind raw from what she'd seen. The mirror felt lighter in her hands now, though she knew its weight had not changed. What had changed was her. Taza stood a short distance away, facing the east. The light caught the edges of his form, making him seem both real and not, as if he were made of air-given shape. "You said your mother hid the mirror in stone," Lena said quietly. "Where?" He turned his gaze toward the shadowed wall of the canyon, a place where the rock curved inward, forming a narrow passage that seemed to breathe darkness. "Beyond there," he said. "In the heart of the mountain. It is where the first fire was lit, and where it must sleep again." Lena nodded, tightening the straps on her pack. The movement felt ritualistic, like preparing for a pilgrimage. The desert around them seemed to shift subtly as they began to walk. Every gust of wind carried whispers of voices like threads of memory unspooling in the air. Once or twice she thought she saw movement along the cliffs, silhouettes watching from above, shapes that vanished when she blinked. "Taza," she said after a while, her voice echoing softly off the stone. "If the mirror shows truth, what happens when it sleeps again? Does it forget?" He shook his head. "Truth does not forget. It forgives." The path narrowed, forcing them close. The air grew cooler, denser, carrying the scent of earth untouched by sun. Lena's hand brushed the canyon wall as they moved. The stone smooth in places, almost warm, like old skin. After a time, the passage widened into a chamber carved by nature's patience. A single shaft of light poured through a crack above, illuminating the floor where a circle of stones lay arranged around a hollow depression. An altar, or a grave. Lena stopped at its edge. Her chest ached with the weight of the moment. "This is it," she whispered. Taza nodded. "It was here my mother stood when she sealed the mirror. Here she promised that truth would sleep until it was called again." Lena hesitated. "And if I return it now?" He met her eyes. "Then the burden leaves you, but only if you place it down honestly." The word honestly caught in her like a thorn. She looked at the mirror in her hands, her reflection staring back, fragile and human. In that moment, she understood what he meant. Returning the mirror wasn't about undoing a theft. It was about surrendering her fear of being seen. Her voice shook. "I took it because I thought it would make me someone. I wanted to matter, to leave a mark." Taza said nothing, but all it did, she continued, was show me what I already was, and what I ran from. I lied to everyone, including myself. Her throat tightened, but she forced the words out. "I'm sorry." The sound of her apology seemed to ripple through the chamber, carried by unseen wind. The air trembled faintly, the circle of stones glowing with a dim, living light. Taza inclined his head. "Now place it down." Lena knelt, the mirror cradled in both hands. For a heartbeat she hesitated, then lowered it gently into the hollow. The glass caught the sunlight and flared once, a brilliant pulse that filled the chamber with white. When the light faded, the mirror was gone. In its place lay only smooth stone, warm beneath her fingers. Lena felt something inside her uncoil, a tension she hadn't even realized she'd carried her whole life. It was as if she'd been holding her breath for years and had finally exhaled. When she looked up, Taza was watching her with a quiet tenderness that seemed to reach beyond life itself. "It's done," he said. The light from the shaft above caught his face. For the first time, he looked almost young. Not the eternal guardian, but the man he might once have been. Lena blinked against sudden tears. "What happens to you now?" He smiled faintly, that small, knowing smile she had come to recognize as his. "The mirror is home. My promise is kept." The air shimmered around him, edges dissolving into gold dust. "No," she said, voice breaking. "Don't!" He reached out, his hand hovering an inch from hers. "You are seen now," he said softly. "That is all I was meant to do." Then he was gone, not vanished violently, but folded gently back into the air like a breath returning to the wind. Lena sat alone in the quiet chamber, the morning light warming her face, and for the first time in years she felt unburdened. Not redeemed, not yet, but open. Outside, the desert was waiting. By the time Lena stepped out of the canyon, the sun had risen high enough to burn away the last of the morning mist. The desert stretched endlessly before her, the same as it had always been, yet somehow transformed. Or perhaps it was she who had changed. The air felt alive on her skin. Each gust of wind brushed against her like a benediction, whispering over the sand as though carrying the faint hum of voices long at rest. She could almost hear them, the echo of Conde's chant, the murmur of Taza's promise, the pulse of her own confession folding into the wind. The world, she realized, hadn't forgiven her. It had simply stopped needing to. The desert didn't keep grudges. It just remembered, and in remembering it restored. Lena walked slowly, following the faint track she'd left when she first stumbled into the canyon. The same cliffs that had once felt like walls now seemed like guardians. The same silence that had frightened her now comforted her. She felt lighter, not because she'd left the mirror behind, but because she'd finally faced what it had shown her. For years she had chased proof of the sacred, relics, artifacts, fragments of vanished lives, trying to fill the hollow inside her with meaning she could touch. But the mirror had taught her what the earth already knew. Truth was not something you found buried. It was something you uncovered within. When she reached the mouth of the canyon, she turned back one last time. The place was bathed in sunlight now, the shadows gone. She thought she saw movement near the chamber entrance and a shimmer of gold in the heat. Taza, or perhaps only the memory of him. Either way, she lifted her hand in silent thanks. The air stirred in answer, a warm gust sweeping past her, rustling the edges of her clothes like a nod returned. "Goodbye," she whispered. Then she began to walk. The desert stretched ahead, wide and waiting. Her pack was lighter now, filled only with notes and tools, and a single scrap of canvas she'd wrapped around the mirror's case. She kept it, though it held nothing inside, a reminder perhaps that emptiness could still have meaning. By midday, the horizon shimmered with heat. Lena paused on a rise, looking out over miles of sand and sky. The world was vast again, too vast for one person to hold, and that no longer frightened her. She thought of the people she'd left behind, her colleagues, her students, her quiet apartment filled with half-finished reports. For the first time, she didn't dread returning. She would tell the truth, not about ghosts or miracles, but about what she'd learned. That some things were not meant to be owned, that seeing was not the same as understanding, and that forgiveness, like the desert, didn't come when asked. It came when you stopped running. As she walked, the rhythm of her steps matched the pulse of the earth beneath her. She found herself humming, a tune she didn't know but somehow remembered. A lullaby carried by the canyon wind. The light began to soften again, shadows lengthening across the dunes. The desert, tireless and eternal, folded her into its stillness once more. When she finally reached the ridge overlooking the valley, she turned to watch the sun sink behind the cliffs. The colors bled together. Amber, rose, violet, painting the sky with all the shades of endings and beginnings. Lena felt tears gather in her eyes, but this time they didn't hurt. For the first time, she saw herself clearly in the fading light. Not the scholar, not the thief, not the woman who had tried to rewrite history. Just Lena, flesh and dust. A single life in the great sweep of the world. And as the sun vanished, she heard it again. A whisper, soft as breath on her ear. "Now you have been seen." She smiled. The wind carried her laughter into the dark, and the desert, ancient and vast, seemed to exhale with her, not in sorrow but in peace.